It's a 17. Your thief finds a secret door. Do you want to open it?
Yes.
Everything at the field of your vision starts to fade away and get fuzzy. And then suddenly you find yourself, you realize that you're slowly teleporting. And you find yourself, and it's April 10th, 2013. And you're on 508, a show about Worcester. What do you think about that, Brendan?
I think that was the most excellent use of the bag of holding ever.
It's Brendan Milliken on the show today. And I am Michael Benedetti. There's also a disinterested studio audience on the 508 program. Today, let's just talk about casinos, and we'll also do some mea culpas on the 508 program. Brendan,
Mike.
I want to talk to you about this casino stuff.
All right.
Oh, and by the way, for the people at home, we can't do this because of copyright reasons, but I think that you should get your copy of the AC/DC song "Money Talks" and just play that on repeat in the background, just to kind of get yourself pumped up through this segment. So there's this thing about this slot machine casino. Mm-hmm. This is really just like the big news. This could be the big news for a while in Worcester, but it's definitely the big news right now.
Yes.
Like where do we start explaining this thing of casinos? The state legislature a while ago decided that it would be
2011. Yeah.
So a couple of years ago, they said they had a vote, and they said, okay, we're going to let there be a few casinos.
Handful of casinos, and then what we're looking at was a part of that legislation allowed for one slot parlor. Just
one slot parlor, and so
on the outside, anyways. Yeah.
And so these guys who develop these kinds of things is like, we want to have the slot parlor, and we want to put it in Worcester.
There's 4 sites that have actually been identified. I can't remember them all off the top of my head. I believe Raynham is one of them, but yes. Now Worcester has become the 4th site that is being looked at by a private company that would like to build a slot parlor here.
And they would this would be a big warehouse full of slot machines, basically?
I guess so. I mean, it could be a yurt or something along those lines.
I've never been to a slot parlor.
I kind of, in my head, I just vision, like a very bland stucco building, a very large one, probably with a little bit of neon, maybe something flashing outside.
A sign that says slot parlor.
Yeah, maybe some nice check cashing signs around the facade. But yeah, no, I don't know what design. That's beyond my scope. But yes, a building with slot machines.
Hundreds of slot machines.
Thousands of slot machines. I have no idea how many slot machines.
Okay.
How many slot machines?
I have no idea.
Yeah, nobody knows.
Innocent bystander just walking by. Okay, so and then there's something about a hotel here too.
Hotel not attached to that property, but part of the scope of the project would be a luxury hotel somewhere in downtown Worcester.
So this would be sort of on the edge of downtown. This would be in that Wyman Gordon lot, that giant semi-abandoned factory lot that's near Kelly Square.
Huge parcel of land, been unoccupied for some time, and that would be Rush Street Gaming, Rush Street Gaming. They're out of Chicago, I believe. That's who's focusing on the slot side of things. Mm-hmm. Richard Friedman, who is a renowned hotel developer from the Cambridge area, he's the one that is looking at the hotel component. But again, they're separate entities that are just kind of in motion together.
This seems weird. Would people stay at a luxury hotel so they could play slot machines in a big warehouse?
Well, that's why I say I think they're separate. They really kind of need to be viewed as separate entities. Mm-hmm. There's clearly a relationship of sorts between the two, but I don't necessarily think that the expectation is that people are going to leave the slot parlor with their big winnings and go stay at a 5-star hotel. I think the hope is that a 5-star hotel or a 4-star, whatever we're doing for ratings these days, would have its own draw, and it's probably its own amenities attached to it.
So we should just talk about the slot machine stuff
yes.
as far as this conversation goes. Okay, so, but this doesn't exist yet, this slot machine parlor.
Not that I'm aware of.
And what has to happen? Like, besides building the slot machine parlor, mm-hmm. there's also some procedural stuff that has to happen between now and then?
Yes. So, high level, you essentially have, and this is where we are now, the gaming company and the city of Worcester, through, in our case, the manager's office, will negotiate a host package.
Okay.
And that is going to be or host agreement. And that is going to be an agreement. The term mitigation is used to describe what the gaming company is going to give the city of Worcester for the rights to put a slot parlor in the city. And to sum that up is basically the idea that whether they be negative impacts or positive impacts, there's without a doubt there's going to be impacts on the city, and that that proposal will try and hone in on ways that the gaming commission or the gaming company can lower the impact or enhance the impact, if they're positives, on the city through some form of mitigation. Or
because we should say that I think that if we were just talking about bringing slot machines to Worcester, that would be a different conversation. If somebody said, okay, now every bar in Worcester can have a slot machine or
Right.
something like this, then it's like, okay. So now we have more gambling going on in Worcester, but there's already Keno and things going on in bars.
Yep.
So there's certainly people gambling in bars in Worcester. But we're saying somebody wants to put in, I don't know why he described this in my mind as a warehouse, like a giant thing with hundreds or thousands of slot machines in it as like a one big thing, boom, in this vacant lot.
Yep.
And there's some kind of impacts from that for sure.
Yeah, and who knows? I mean, maybe it could be it could be as small as traffic patterns change. So we need new street lights, and the city of Worcester doesn't want to put up street lights, so Rush Street Gaming will pay for them.
Okay.
Maybe we feel as though we're going to need more police officers, so they pay for a public safety class. There are some limitations onto where those monies can go, what they can be used for, and I believe even the time frame. So that, if I'm not mistaken, you're not allowed to put together packages that would say, the city's going to take like a rev share for the next 20 years of potential profits or whatnot.
Yeah.
They have to be actual items that can be identified that they can support financially.
So we should do a brief digression here. A couple weeks ago on the show, it was actually the 10th anniversary of the beginning of the Iraq War, and we didn't talk about that on the show. I thought it was an interesting anniversary because I saw a lot of pundits that day were talking about either why they were sorry that they'd supported the war or why they weren't sorry they'd supported the war, but a lot of mea culpas, as they say, around, saying like, okay, I supported it, but I was wrong, and here's why I think I was wrong at the time. We make mistakes too. I didn't support the Iraq War, but I have made a lot of mistakes on this show. And actually, one of the most recent mistakes was after these developers came out and said, we want to open this slots parlor, the first couple of reactions from public officials I heard were very negative. And so I was on the show talking about how I felt like our public officials were not being very creative in looking at this and trying to figure out a way they could support this. I was completely wrong about that impression because the public officials are pretty much in favor of this at this point. Would you say? I mean, at least the way that people are talking seems like people are.
I think what people are in favor of is almost it's not so much that they're in favor of the proposal. I think folks are in favor of not having to be the ones to make a decision on it. And I think in a way that was one of the genius bits of the legislation that brought us to this point is that it's kind of written in a way that absolves elected officials from having to take a stand on the issue one way or another, and instead put it in the hands of the voters, which is the tail end of the process, at least on the local level.
So we need to, okay. So right. So you were talking about that. There's this that they may be able to open this casino here, but that the city would, as part of this, be able to counter and say, we're going to write up an agreement that we want to get into with you, where you give us some funding to do this and that and the other thing to make.
And maybe Mike O'Brien would just ask for, the city manager would just ask for a sandwich, right? But I mean, I think the hope is that they would ask for something that would benefit the city, and then from there, the agreement would be signed off on, and then you have a kind of a buffer period that's kind of like a cooling off period, which is kind of designed for local debate and what have you, and then it comes to a referendum. Where the voters in the city would then be able to come out and vote on up or down whether or not they actually think the package and the casino are viable and should be in the city. And then from there, it gets pushed off to the Gaming Commission, who then gets to take a look at, again, because the way it's written now, there can only be one slot parlor in the state. There are already 4 proposed, so they'll wait till all 4 of those packages come together in the time frame that's been allotted, and then the Gaming Commission will make a final decision as to which they feel should be awarded.
Oh, really? So I mean, so roughly speaking, this thing could go all the way through, and everybody in Worcester could be like, this sounds like a great idea, and then there's still a chance that it's not going to happen here.
Yeah, I mean, it could fail on a number of levels. I mean, again, there's no guarantee that all 4 of those communities, or if more come on, I don't think there's a window for more to come on, but if all 4 those communities could fail the referendums, and maybe we'll be the only ones left. We could fail a referendum. Maybe the city and the gaming group won't actually be able to come to an agreement on a host agreement and not allow it to go forward to a referendum. There's a lot of things that could change in the process. It's not a done deal, but on some level, the whole process is designed to allow the maximum amount of citizen engagement. And again, in a way, it's kind of creative in that it absolves a lot of responsibility of local elected officials from being put in a position where they would either have to take a stance pro or con, and instead put the hands in the say in the voters.
Now, so recently it seems like the city council, at least some of the city councilors, seem to be interested in avoiding taking a stand on this and just saying, I have no control. This week at the city council meeting, people were making very strong statements at them, like maybe you should actually take a leadership role
Which
or
they
express
can
an
do.
idea, a vision.
Yeah, there's
So-
nothing saying that they can't do that, but there's other than an exercise in representative democracy, there's little upside for them to do that.
They are gonna have a vote about this in the city council, though.
The vote, well, the vote that they're planning on taking now is just reinforcing that, and this should be taking place in 2 weeks. Should be a vote to reinforce their wish that the manager engage in the negotiations for a host
Okay.
agreement.
So
it's not in favor
okay.
of the proposal. It's in favor of the manager actually going
Negotiating.
forward and negotiating something to see what comes out.
Is it possible? What happens if? I mean, so let's say, for example, that the council voted and said we don't want the manager to negotiate a host agreement,
Yep.
and then the manager said, "Okay, fine, I won't write up this host agreement."
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean that there's then no vote of the city's people of Worcester?
Technically, that's what's happened in other communities. I believe that's what happened in Foxborough, where there was a proposal.
Is
and
Foxborough in Massachusetts?
Yes.
Okay.
Under the same
No
guidelines.
idea. I have no idea.
Don't get
I'm very
overwhelmed.
tired. I'm very foggy-headed today. I'm very uninformed. It's a little bit like Jordan Levy is hosting the show today.
If
but-
we look at
We'll muddle
our form
through.
of government and we assume that although the manager runs the show, but he works at the discretion of the council, the council, in theory, could instruct him to not negotiate a host agreement
Okay.
with the gaming company, and in theory, it would just die in the water.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, those are kind of uncharted waters, but that seems to be the way things have functioned elsewhere. So yeah.
So it is. So at least your sense of it is that there is the possibility of the city manager or the city council saying there's not going to be a slot parlor in Worcester.
Yeah, no, but the potential is there. Again, I think, and I don't know if it's a good argument. I think the argument that the council would then make is, well, if they put their personal beliefs on that forward, all they're doing is cutting out the ability of the voters to actually speak to it. And it's, of course, a double-edged sword. I mean, I'm sure we could look at any referendum or ballot question that either went our way or didn't go our way and say that was either a great exercise in mob rule or a terrible exercise in mob rule.
Right.
I think the concern is there's a lot of people that actually think this is a great idea.
Sure.
There are just as many, if not more, people who think it's a terrible idea.
Sure.
One of those two groups is going to lose. I think in an election year, elected officials would rather let one of those two groups lose on their own accord as opposed to try and pick the
Stick their
team
neck
that they're
out.
going to get behind.
Yeah.
I don't know that that's the most noble way to approach things, but it kind of makes sense from the position of trying to stay in office, I guess.
Okay. So let's say that the city council says to the manager, you know what, we should negotiate with these guys. There's possibly some value in this whole thing.
Yes.
See what you can come up with and pass a host agreement.
Right.
Or write up a host agreement. Then there would be a vote.
Mm-hmm.
We would have a special election for this?
We have to have a special election. Again, from what I understand, it has to be a separate ballot from any other election. So I know people have been talking about the potential of it being on the June 25th special election for a Senate race. It sounds like that would overcomplicate things because you would actually need to have two separate ballots, which would then require two separate check-ins and check-outs, and it would be a very convoluted mess.
Yeah, I can imagine it getting a
could
little
just-
confusing if people were having to go through
Yeah.
two voting processes at the same time.
And not everyone might actually know what they're showing up to vote for.
Right.
So in all likelihood, it will be a separate local referendum that will
Okay.
just be run through the Worcester Election Commission. So I assume the clerk is probably trying to work through that now. And yeah, it'll just be a special election open to all registered voters at the time.
Okay. And
And then from there, it gets magically pushed off to the Gaming Commission, and we cross our fingers.
we see what happens.
Yeah.
So now I on the last show, one thing that I don't think I've made a mistake on is that I on the last show said, you know what, I could see some value in this happening. This is a site which the company Wyman Gordon has not been using this site. It doesn't seem like really for a long time. There's some concern about that this is a brownfield, that there's some kind of contamination, and the EPA would require some kind of work to be done on this area. And so, like, the fact that somebody says, you know what, I want to deal with a problem property, a huge problem property, very near to downtown,
Yep.
right in the center of the city, and do something with it. And there will be some jobs and things. I mean, there will be some jobs and things. That's fine. Like, that seems okay to me. I mean, like, people are going to gamble and engage in bad behavior. That's fine. I mean, and we could even say, like, maybe some of the people who are backing this are unsavory or doing unsavory things or whatever. Like, like, if we want to make it illegal for unsavory people to do business in the city, that's a whole different conversation.
You're going to have to show me the door.
Well, we have plenty of unsavory people on this very show, myself included. So it just seems to me like, sure, let's see what This could be positive.
I don't think I would go so far as to be that supportive of it, but of the idea. But I'm kind of in a similar small boat, I guess, where I get really weirded out by some of the moral arguments against gambling because it's just not my place to get involved in. I also get somewhat weirded out by some of the more heavy-handed concern of addiction issues and whatnot, because those are things that we should be able to deal with. And again, gambling actually exists. We're not cutting something.
You're right.
We're not eliminating
Do you
something.
think we're going to see some sort of additional number of local people who have a gambling problem as a result of
I don't know, and I mean that's what I'm saying. I mean,
I could buy that. I don't know anything about the science.
I think there's an argument to be made there. I would equally argue that there's probably X number of, like an unknown, but X number of gaming dollars in the world, and X number of gamblers, and they're probably figuring out a way to. We're probably not going to see many people who are just going to wake up one morning and say gambling, and find this new thing. That's not really my concern. Really the only thing I've been left with that's been really bugging me as a homeowner and someone who has like a family in the city is I remember growing up in Worcester and being very sensitive to the fact that anytime I left Worcester, especially as a teenager, whether it be Cape Cod or another part of the country, I never failed to run into people who knew where I was from. But again, growing up in the 80s and 90s, they knew where I was from because they knew Worcester had great heroin, and they knew about our awesome sign that AIDS and hepatitis B had not been controlled in the Piedmont area. And it always really bugged me being not just a lifer myself in Worcester, but someone like generationally a lifer in Worcester, that like I was raised to appreciate like all the great things in Worcester, and everywhere I went, I met people who just knew, some of our sketchier aspects of city life that are not uncommon. And it bothers me to think that my son will grow up in a city that will be labeled as, well, that's the place with the slots parlor.
The slot machine capital of Central Massachusetts.
The thing that Lawrence didn't have any interest in. And that bothers me on a more personal level. And I think, there are plenty of arguments to be made pro and con for this. I think that's actually the thing that city officials need to be thinking of, is that we already have a lot of middle class drain from the city. People moving, no shortage of people selling their homes, moving to Holden, Paxton, places unknown. Their arguments for doing so are not always well articulated, but they seem to drill down to concern for their family and what growing up is going to be like. I don't think this is going to help. And in a way, I think that's where some of the folks who spoke yesterday at the council meeting and other folks who have been publicly opposed, I think at the core of their message is this idea, like, is this actually what we want the city of Worcester to be?
Because this is going to be a big thing.
It's physically a big thing. It's just like when Walmart came in. It's a massive space, and it's going to have some impact. I'm not in a position to be able to pull out the crystal ball and see what the impact's going to be 20 years down the road, but there is going to be an impact, and we need to be prepared for whatever that impact is, up to including just not wanting to be here anymore.
I want to talk to you about something that's very related. I've been reading this book by Nassim Taleb, Anti-Fragile. This book, Anti-Fragile, is one of the best books I've read in a couple of years. And he is getting at some ideas that connect to things that we've talked about on this show, resilient communities, sustainable development. Like, do we want a Walmart? And I think that he articulates some of my concern about these things in a smarter way than I've ever thought them through or articulated them.
We should just start reading books on
We should start reading. Well, I always love reading a book on the show. We should read more newspapers on the show too. He has a wonderful subchapter title, "Small may be ugly, but it is certainly less fragile." He says, "We often hear the expression small is beautiful. It is potent and appealing. Many ideas have been offered in its support, almost all of them anecdotal, romantic, or existential." Then he says, I'm going to present this with this approach which involves a sort of statistical mode of thinking. He says, another aspect of size, large corporations also end up endangering neighborhoods. I've used the following argument against large superstore chains in spite of the advertised benefits. A large super megastore wanted to acquire an entire neighborhood near where I live, causing uproar owing to the change it would bring to the character of the neighborhood. The argument was in favor of the revitalization of the area, that type of story. I fought the proposal on the following grounds. Should the company go bust, and the statistical elephant in the room is that it eventually will, we would end up with a massive war zone. This is the type of argument that the British advisors Rohan Silva and Steve Hilton have used in favor of small merchants, along the poetic, small is beautiful. It is completely wrong to use the calculus of benefits without including the probability of failure. So we have a number of parcels in the city, and we talk about them so much on this show. the South Worcester Industrial
We've
Park.
done shows in them.
We've done shows in them. The downtown mall, which was like, you know, at this point maybe 10 years, sort of semi-abandoned or under construction or whatever.
But now it's a road, so technically
But now
it's not a parcel anymore.
Now it's a couple of parcels. That we have these giant properties in the city, and I feel like if you have a small property in the city, you know, if somebody has a storefront, if somebody has a house and they move or they die or something, or they go out of business, somebody else can go in there. There's a lot of people who have the kind of capital to go in there and deal with that.
Not with those giant spaces, though.
Not with the giant spaces. Even if it's polluted, people have the ability to deal with a small lot. Probably a lot easier. There's many fewer people, many fewer organizations that can do that, and it seems like every time they come in, they have the kind of leverage to say to the city, like, you give me something, you have to work, or the city's out there trying to find people to do this.
I'm glad you read that, because that actually it does a great job of honing in on one of the things that I've had a really hard time articulating or thinking through in my own head about the casino. So I mean, if you look at this property, it's I think 15 acres, 14 acres. It's something in that range. It's an enormous piece of property. So Rush Street Gaming is already functioning in Massachusetts as a subsidiary. So let's go down the negative line that they could go out of business, right? So the subsidiary just dissolves, right? It files bankruptcy. Doesn't actually impact Rush Street Gaming.
Right.
The parent company stays completely liquid. This, say, it goes south, they just go out of business. Now we're stuck, and maybe this is 10 years down the road, 15 years down the road.
Maybe it's
Who
5
knows?
years down the road.
It could be.
The reality
yeah.
is, I mean, what's the chance of it? The chance of it going out of business within 5 years? Probably 1%.
But we're going to take a commercial property at our highest tax rate that has been off the tax rolls for an extended period of time, bring it back on the tax rolls as usable space, and we're now going to be doing business day to day with the economic realities of this 14-acre parcel of land being taxable land. And that's going to be our new reality until
Right.
it goes out of business. And then when it goes out of business, whatever that tax valuation is just going to magically disappear from our city budget.
Right.
That's the sort of thing that, again, the city really needs to think through. There's a great upside with the attached hotel, but if we get to a point where we're now having difficulty funding public safety or public education or public works, whatever the case may be, because one business that encompasses a 14-acre parcel of commercial space goes under, that's the sort of thing that could be tragic for a city that gets used to the new economic reality of being able to rely upon those tax dollars,
Right.
that revenue stream.
So I would say part of the upside here is that you have this 14-acre property, which at least it's no longer a brownfield.
It's no longer a rock farm.
Well, it's no longer people have done like the environmental mitigation to clean it up.
Yep.
So the next person who has to deal with this is going to have a lot easier time. But at the same time, you do have this. So I mean,
Who is that next person? I mean,
who is that next person? And I guess my question, and I've asked people who I know about urban planning and haven't gotten a good answer, is, are there best practices for dealing with this problem? I was just looking at this old article from a couple years ago. Barbara Haller, then city councilor, was complaining about this property, and she said that she felt like the company that owned this property was like holding the city hostage because they had this huge property, and they're just like, we can do whatever we want because we are. It's like the old. It's like the what's the old saying? If you owe the bank $1 million, the bank owns you. If you owe the bank $10 million, you own the bank.
Depending on who you talk to, they weren't even answering phone calls from the manager's office when they were trying to inquire, like, what's the deal here? What do we need to make? What do we need to do to make something happen?
Yeah.
Until somebody actually came in with a reasonable proposal to buy the property.
So I feel like this is the issue, and this is not an issue which the casino developers are causing, right? This is an issue which is an ongoing issue. I'm sure other cities face it, which is like having a variety of properties, maybe distributed along a fractal scale, where you have a lot of small properties and a few large properties. This makes sense within the fabric of a city. Having, obviously having things like giant office parks and hospitals and things in the city is awesome, but like, is there some kind of, I wish that somebody was asking the city manager for a report on best practices of other cities with dealing with this, of saying, because this could be part of, I feel like this could be part of a mitigation situation for something like this, a mitigation package, to say to them, like, maybe it's put a bunch of money in escrow so that if you go and for the next 10 years, so that if you go out of business in the next 10 years, there's
Sure.
at least the money to come in and rehab things and maybe fix some
And knock your
sewage
stupid building
problem.
down and sell it to like a housing developer or
Right.
something that would
Right.
actually be in tune with the neighborhood as
Right.
opposed to the self-contained entity.
Or maybe you say to the guys, like, why don't you like rehab this property and then sell a couple of acres off and break it
Well,
up a little
yeah,
smaller?
And that's where I've been really torn with just trying not to be negative in the idea of development, because the reality is we've had this, again, I think it's 14 acres, but we've had this parcel. How many cities can say they have 14 acres of vacant land in the heart of their downtown corridor? That's absurd that it's even
A lot of
exists.
ghost towns.
A lot of yes, I mean, I'm sure there are Chinese mining towns that were mothballed years ago that have that kind of land access. But
Yeah.
I mean, to think of how much land is actually available there, the potential is astronomical. But the potential only exists within the realm of being able to wrestle that property away from the current owner without going down the road of eminent domain or whatever the case may be. So yeah, I mean, it's shameful to think that we would want to turn down development. At the same time, we need to ensure that if that development is going to have impact, again, positive or negative, that we're dealing with both in parallel and thinking that through. We're not just building another mall, or we're not building, another whatever because we have the opportunity to. We're actually thinking through the potential outcomes.
Yeah.
And I wish I had answers for that one. I probably wouldn't be sitting here with you right now. I'd probably be making a lot more money, or sitting with you just
We would be
throwing money
sitting in
everywhere.
we would have a
if we
fancier
had the answers
studio.
to that. We would have a much better studio and a bigger studio audience. Not nearly as well behaved, but it would definitely be a bigger studio audience. I don't know.
There it is.
But we're going to get there. I mean, the thing is, though, that if people, regardless of how you feel about this, you're in favor of it or against it, you need to actually be out there talking to people. Because that's the thing that the gaming company itself, they have the media package and the resources to actually get their message out there. Regardless of where you stand on it, you need to be doing the same thing. You actually need to be talking to your neighbors. Like, what is the city going to look like in 10 years if this happens? Pro or con? And that's the thing that scares me, is that more people are sitting around waiting to see what comes out of these negotiations, which is an important component of it. But at the end of the day, the one outcome that seems day by day more real is that this could actually get pushed to the state to make a ruling on, and then we're stuck with whatever the state says, and we need to be prepared for that. And the entire community actually needs to be having big conversations amongst themselves as to what that looks like for the city of Worcester.
Well, we are definitely going to have more conversations. I think we'll have people who have strong opinions, pro and con, on this show going forward. I don't know why I'm just feeling so... I feel like there's so many issues that I can just get so ridiculously passionate about. And this is one of them that I'm still feeling calm.
I honestly don't know why I've been feeling so... I think agnostic is the only way to actually frame it, but I'm having a really hard time getting amped up over it, even though I think in the back of my head I know I don't want it here. It's been very difficult to articulate why without falling into one of those buckets that I've been finding kind of annoying, that there are plenty of easy, low-hanging fruit arguments against gambling. I don't think they're rational, reasonable arguments for a society in 2013 to be making. But I think there are some really, really good arguments that we're just starting to scratch the surface on in terms of why this might not be a good thing from a practical perspective. Again, long-term impact on the city, or what happens if they just decide to go away one day. That stuff could be huge, and that's the stuff I don't think we're hearing enough people talking about.
Talk to your neighbors. Also, you can now stop playing AC/DC's Money Talks and start playing Won't Get Fooled Again. Because another thing that we need to be looking forward to on this show is that there's municipal elections coming up in the fall. Once again, we'll be trying to get candidates on the show. It's going to happen.
Start watching The Wire
whether
now,
we wanted
folks.
to or not. We're going to ask candidates questions. As in the past, we're going to have a small series of issues we're going to focus on. Very curious to know. Email pieandcoffee@gmail.com. If you have a question, if you have an issue that you think is an issue that we should really be focusing in and that you want to hear the candidates talk about, because we'll get them to talk about it if nobody else will. Obviously, we'll be asking them how much they can bench. Obviously, we'll be asking them about The Wire. Probably the casino question will be a relevant question on one angle or another. Other issues that you care about, other issues that are important to the city of Worcester, let us know. pieandcoffee@gmail.com. Brendan, I think that's the end of the show. Thanks for being on.
Well, thanks for having me. Do I have any other decisions I need to make in terms of my role as a thief here?
No, I
Need
just
to
want
roll
to.
again?
I just want to roll the dice one more time. The power of chance. Everyone, thank you again for watching the show. We'll talk to you next week.
It's a loaded die.
4.